welcome to Backroom Politics, the best political talk show you've never heard of. It's been another busy news week in the nation's capital and around the globe. The Supreme Court spoke on a few issues, saying, baby, you can drive my car as long as it's not for official business. This, as well as a big decision on abortion. The House Bengazi Committee has issued a report from both the majority and the minority.
And folks in between.
And folks in between. As well as Donald Trump is in the news, and Google, what is a BrExit? That said, I'm here around the table, as we are every week, with Bob Hines.
How are you there?
Carl Tuvin.
Hello.
Denise Krepp.
Hello.
Alan Moore.
Yo.
And my co-host, your Admiral, Ken Carradine.
Hi Dan. How are you?
So there are a little that seemed uninspired.
Sorry.
I always kind of wanted to do this as the opening, as a wrestling introduction, like Ken the Admiral Carradine.
Okay. Moving right along.
All right. Anyway, the humor is lost. Too hip at the table. So, as we all know, there was a big vote in the UK, and I have to be specific on the UK, not Britain, but the UK, on whether or not to remain in the EU. And to many people's amazement, the EU lost in the UK. And the next morning, we also had an interesting stat released from Google, saying a whole bunch of people ended up asking the Google machine, what is a BrExit and what happens if Britain leaves the EU? Alan Moore, can you tell us what exactly happened and what are the ramifications of the UK vote?
Well, ramifications remain to be seen. What we know is that there was that a majority of voters, by a 52 to 48 percentage in Britain, in Scotland, and in Wales and in Northern Ireland, a majority of the total voted to leave the EU, to exit. So hence BrExit, the British exit from the EU. It's never happened before that a country has left the EU, so it remains to be seen what the increasingly famous Rule 50 actually means. That's the rule that governs apparently what's involved if a member country chooses to leave. We're hearing things like, let's get them out of there soon. Others say this is going to take a couple of years. We have the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who said after losing the issue on which he placed his future political career, that he would be stepping down, but he'll step down in October. That will trigger another election. And he says, this is going to be for the next prime minister and the next government to sort out. It was something of a stunner. It has echoes, though, of feelings in America today and in other countries in Europe, in the EU. This feeling that countries are losing control of their own destiny. There's strains of anti-immigration here. There's strains of income inequality, and you have a large electorate who simply buys into the rhetoric that immigrants and open borders are destroying the country, and both in terms of its ethnic makeup, neighborhoods, etc., but also its economy. Very similar arguments to what Donald Trump occasionally puts together. I say occasionally because he's not always Mr. Consistency in the arguments, but other people help him out by reinterpreting the things he says.
Quite often.
And there's just there is a nationalistic, nativist strain of thinking that seems to be emerging around the world, and in England there's a national referendum that reflects it.
Denise Krepp.
And that's the strange part, because I think most folks thought it was Austria that would go first. So the Austrian nationalists lost less than a month ago. but the British nationalists took Britain out of the EU, and for me, it's strange. I mean, Britain has always been much more diverse than your Frances and your Germanys, and by diverse I mean they were more welcoming, and they accepted people that did not A, look like them, and B, did not share their same religious beliefs. And the same type of tolerance could not be found in the other countries.
Carl Tubin.
Well, the interesting thing is that right after this happened, and then 24 hours later, they were out there getting petitions to re-vote. And a lot of people were saying, we were not told that everything was going to go to hell in a handbasket. And I didn't follow the election as I would here, but evidently there was a lot of things that weren't told the British people.
For example, the pound reaching a 30-year low.
Right, exactly.
Markets
Right.
being in.
How couldn't they know that?
Free
I mean,
fall.
that's what everybody was talking about ahead of time.
Yeah,
There's no way
there
you
were
can
no
say,
secrets
no.
in this campaign.
No.
From David Cameron on down, they were talking about major economic dislocations, impact on the pound, impact on jobs, impact on exports, impact on stocks.
Yeah.
But the other side was saying garbage, nonsense, that's the establishment, that's the wealthy elite trying to protect themselves, they're lying about it. One of the interesting phrases that those who were proposing to leave the EU were talking about, and they had it emblazoned on trucks that would drive around and on other posters and so on. Instead of sending 350 million pounds a year to the EU, let's keep it at home and spend it on the National Health Service. And like many countries with national health programs, they face major challenges of financing. Bernie Sanders never pays any attention to that, but countries that are actually living with those kinds of systems struggle constantly. And no sooner did the vote, but that was a line that appeared everywhere. And no sooner did the vote occur than the head of the British Independence Party, a guy named Farage, said, "Yeah, actually, it's sort of unfortunate that argument had as much visibility because no, we can't assure anything about diverting money, the EU money to any particular thing." There was certainly on behalf of the government, the Cameron's government, no effort to hide anything at all. How much the pound would go down, nobody knew. Nobody will know where it'll be in a week. Nobody knows where it'll be in a month, except maybe George Soros, who appears to have made some bets, as he is wont to do, against currencies, and he seems to guess pretty well fairly often. But the dislocations are going to play out over a long period of time. I think the sad part is that most economists agree today and will agree down the road that the British economy took a permanent hit from this, but quantifying it on an individual basis, community basis, no one will ever be able to know exactly who got hurt and who got helped.
Admiral Ken.
So, as late as today, Nigel Farage, who is the leader of the British Independence Party, also known as Donald Trump's twin, approximated that in his explanation of why he pursued this path, that imagine the United States being controlled by NAFTA, not your own borders or not your own government anymore, but NAFTA controlling what you do, or members of the TPP. And I'm curious, Alan, hearing that comment, what your thoughts are on that approximation? Is it even
the height of ignorance? You've got an agglomeration of nation states who, over a period of 50 plus years, choose to join together in a common market with common rules of entry and exit and movement of exports, and they have a parliament, if you of their own, where decisions are made. They have a significant budget. NAFTA is an international trade agreement, the benefits of which are significant and real, but hard to translate to and see on an individual basis. And then when you have Donald Trump on the right and Bernie Sanders on the left blaming NAFTA, a trade agreement with widespread support at the time that Bill Clinton ultimately signed, but it was negotiated ahead of him, saying, of all things, Mexico is eating our lunch because of because of NAFTA. I mean, it's just completely absurd on its face. But NAFTA is simply a trade agreement that lays out details of what can and cannot move between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. The EU is infinitely more than NAFTA, and that's where the
well, I think it's something
fundamental
worth noting. There are two different parts, at least as far as I could tell from the voting. There was the nationalism for the distinguishing between the others and the migration of peoples, especially peoples from the poor European countries into the more prosperous European countries, and there was some definitive pushback on that. And then there were the economic issues.
Right,
but
okay.
Denise.
Brussels is broken. Nobody's going to dispute the fact that Brussels is broken. Nobody's going to dispute the fact that
Greece is broken.
Greece is broken. Spain is broken. Portugal is broken.
Italy's teetering on broken.
Yeah, we're heading in that direction. You're right. It's broken. But you're still going to have to deal with them. So just because you voted yourself out doesn't mean that you get to say, not deal with this anymore. You still do. But not only do you have to deal with it, you have to pull yourself out. And logistically, that's going to be the hardest part. So whoever said this is going to be so easy, no. I have no sympathy for you. You voted. This is what happens in life when you vote. And what really surprised me and upset me the most was people said, well, I didn't think my vote counted.
Well, it is worth noting that the vote actually doesn't
vote.
count. It was basically a national voting poll and now Parliament is supposed to act on it. It actually is not binding.
Well, and theoretically, they may not pull out. So if they do this the way that, so if Cameron, waits until October and says, I'm not going to deal with anything, I'm going to let my successor deal with it. The successor could very easily say, oh, that's nice, pat everybody on the head and not do anything. Meanwhile, you've got France and Germany in particular, who's going, oh, I don't think so. Not as everybody's currencies are tanking right now, you're going to do something.
Well, it's worth noting that part of the impetus for the EU, this is the region of the world that did plunge us into not one, but two world wars.
Right.
And the unification of Europe under a common economy and a common-ish government.
Hold on a second. But when Alan started talking about 50 years ago, it was not necessarily the British. 50 years ago, it was France and Germany, West Germany in particular. The British have always been historically standoffish. They didn't really want to join the EU. And that's one of the reasons they never melded the pound with the EU itself. They had a reluctance. But it's now, again, back to France and Germany. And France and Germany aren't singing Kumbaya anymore. And that's really where the problem's going to be.
And France, there's talk of a Brexit as well. But Admiral Ken.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting in the run-up to this was the fact that Cameron really didn't have to call for a referendum. He really kind of shot himself in the foot when he decided to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm not, so not being in England and clued in as much as the locals would be, I'd be curious to know if anyone around the table knows, did Nigel Farage, did Prime Minister Cameron get pushed into this? Did members of his party abandon him and leave one man standing, or what?
Go ahead.
In the last election, he promised to have this vote.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes politicians break promises, but
sometimes they should.
He made the promise. He always intended to deliver on the promise. He made a horrendous miscalculation in regard to the promise because he was convinced to his core that something like a BrExit, that would be such a huge mistake with such massive and lingering